now I would like to take this narrative you've given about the election being explained by a desire for change and the inability of Harris and the Democratic Party to provide that. I'd like to connect that to what Victor Davis Hanson said and see if you see any resonance between the two ideas. The way that Victor accounted for the election is he sees it, I think, as part of a larger culture war between, on the one hand, what he referred to as the bi-coastal left-wing intellectual elite, and then on the other side, a more common folk that is simply competence-minded and down-to-earth and cares about skills and success and doesn't care about Ivy League degrees.
And has spokespeople like Mr. Hanson.
And has spokespeople like Mr. He is a farmer.
Yes, well, he is.
He is. So on the one hand,
Me too. I have 4 tomato plants. Yeah, go ahead.
On the one hand, I see this as connecting to your idea of change as well, because presumably the right wants change from this obsolete left ruling class. But I wonder if you see a similar culture war afoot at all.
No, I see people like him really trying and stretching to construct such an idea. But in my view, that's because it doesn't work. And they're worried about where all this might go. And this is for them, a much happier story than the one I tell. They don't want to deal with a declining empire. They don't want to deal with a capitalism that doesn't work. They want this to be all in the realm of the bad people on the coasts with their evil elitism versus the men and women of the soil. This game has been played by left-wingers, too. This is a very old way of thinking. He may not know it, but I could give him references if he wants about, where this game has been played before. I don't think the elites, whatever that quite means, on the coast have the power or the understanding to play the nice role of bad guy that his construct assigns to them. I understand what he's doing. It's all over the place. I'm sure he didn't claim he was the origin of this inside. He repeats it. And for me, it's empty. Even if you believed it, you'd have to then explain, why do we have people on the coast who do what they do, say what they say, advocate what... You'd have to explain it. Is there something in the air in California and New York that make them attract? I mean, stop. What is this? And it becomes dangerous, because if it in the hands of people less scrupulous than I hope Mr. Hanson is, this can become, a rural against urban, an educated against uneducated. That's where this goes in the hands of many. And he will bear responsibility, because giving a veneer of respectability to this way of thinking is cheap in the end. No, I like to ground what I'm saying in what's actually happening in the economic realities of the United States. That, there are certain industries that are still viable in the United States. Many industries aren't. Why not? Because capitalists who make these decisions made the decision to relocate their businesses overseas. Or those same capitalists made the decision to automate. Okay, so a whole lot of industries left. And much of the unhappiness of the people in the middle of the country is because that's what they left from. Whereas the industries that still can function for all kinds of reasons, because they're service industries. You can't have a service industry in China serving people in America, because the industry has to be where the people are. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So we exported manufacturing. We didn't export services, with some exceptions. The industries that are still viable here, high tech, They went to California for all kinds of reasons long ago. So they can expand, they can hire more. Everybody can go live, in San Jose or in the environment. But that's not because, however lovely California's climate, it's because these are industries that are still viable as leadership industries in world capitalism located here. That leadership, by the way, is leaching away. Last week, we all got a lesson when DeepSeek showed us what can be done by those nasty Chinese folks in the way of the high-tech AI revolution. It's not going to be dominated by the United States. That's what the lesson is. But we're going to watch. What is the story the Hansons of this world are going to tell us about China's arrival? They're going to tell us, sadly, that the Chinese copied a lot of the United States, which is true but irrelevant. The newcomer always copies the old one. When the United States broke from Britain, you know what the Britain charged the United States with for the whole 19th century? Stealing our technology, which had its grain of truth. It always does. But this sudden, they're stealing. This is, how awful. What you're really revealing is you don't know anything about your own history. What are you doing? It becomes cheap, and it slides into, well, I'll leave that to the audience to figure out where that stuff slides to. So I understand the effort to make this a culture war is, in my judgment, an attempt to distract attention from other dimensions which not only explain the story better, but help us understand why that culture war even exists. What is its origin, its cause? Otherwise, you start with a culture war. What is that? How are you going to ground that? And by the way, I don't know, Mr. Hanson, but that kind of argument then becomes grounded in stories of education. The political complexity of the United States that I've been talking about was not significantly different from the political orientation of my classmates at Harvard, Stanford, and Yale. So that's supposedly the elite, but they were as clueless about the left wing as most Americans were, because they were affected by the same culture war against the left that came out of World War II. The most famous economics professor at Harvard at my time was a man with a big reputation named Joseph Schumpeter. You may have heard his name. Okay? Joseph Schumpeter had a prize student at Harvard named Paul Sweezy.
I was hoping you'd say Rick Wolff.
No, Paul Sweezy. They're older than me. I was young, just arriving there. Paul Sweezy who himself was a graduate of Harvard, who was a member of the Rockefeller family, the right one. And so he grew perfect. He's at Harvard getting his degree, comes from the wealthy, and he's the heir apparent to Joseph Schumpeter. At the end of the 1940s, Harvard fires him. He's teaching already. They fire him. They're not going to let him replace Schumpeter as Schumpeter wanted. No. Why? Because he had become a Marxist in the 1930s, as so many had. And Harvard, under the gun and the pressure, had no more backbone then than it has had recently with its other leaders that it dumped when the wind politically changed. And where did Sweezy go? He left Harvard and went to New York City and founded a magazine called the Monthly Review, which still exists, using money given to him by Albert Einstein, who wrote the editorial in the first issue of Monthly Review, which was entitled Why I Am a Socialist. All of that, that's the culture war. But for people to think that the culture war didn't come out of the history of this country is very bizarre. Very bizarre. So I don't, as a proposition, I don't take it serious. As an interesting phenomena of how you avoid, this is the continuation of the taboo on the Marxist or the leftist way of opening up a question. It's an approach that will not debate. In Europe, it's quite different. There, the right has to debate the left. It's too hard. They can't just dismiss it. They try. In good American copying, try to do, because they envy what the United States can do to its working class, because you can't do it there. Right? Europeans have a national health service. Europe doesn't allow the death penalty. European universities are mostly free. Yet you can't do to the working class there, and their capitalists are envious. But other than that, the culture war stuff cannot be pursued there the way it is here, because it doesn't have this history.